Good morning, everyone. All right. So far, we have completed with the JSON part, and we know like what it means by the process of serialization and the process of deserialization. And we also have gone through with, well, if we are performing the serialization process, that means if you are converting a Salesforce object record into JSON format, then how we can do this with the JSON generator class that we have seen. Similarly, if we are performing the deserialization, that means if we are converting a JSON data into Salesforce object record, then how we can perform that as well, either by using a JSON parser class or else by using JSON.deserialize method. So that is what we have completed so far. What are the considerations if you are using a deserialize method? And if you are using a JSON, a JSON parser class, then how we can do that entire thing we have seen so far. Now let's move on to two different forms of integrations. Let's move on to two different forms of integrations, and we would going to understand the role of HTTP classes as well as web services. Now see, integrations are of two types. Let me try to draw a small diagram for this. The integrations are of two types. Let's consider this is my Salesforce environment, whereas this is my Salesforce environment, whereas this one is a third-party system. All right, this one is a third-party system. Now see, if we are performing an integration, that means if, for example, I wanted to get certain information from this third-party system. I wanted to get a certain information from this third-party system. Now, this type of integration, first of all, is called as inbound integration. It is just like an incoming call. You can compare this. You can find a relevancy between this term inbound and an incoming call. So if you, as a Salesforce, are receiving certain parameters, certain data, certain records from an external third-party system, from an external system, then this type of integration is called as an inbound integration. Now, to perform this inbound integration, see, we obviously would require to ask for something, right? If I wanted to get an information from an external system, I would first of all would require to transfer a few of parameters, isn't it? I would require to transfer a few of parameters to this third party system, right? I would have to require a certain parameters to this third party system. And after receiving after receiving those parameters, this third party system would send a response, would send a response that is going to be in the form of JSON. That is going to be in the form of JSON, which we are going to receive in Salesforce. And what needs to be get done that we would be see. We would going to see this in the upcoming topics. First of all, try to understand what sort of integration this is called as. What sort of integration this is called as. So when you are transferring a few parameters to a third-party system, and based on what you have asked, based on what you have asked, this external system would transfer a certain response back that you are going to receive inside in Salesforce. So this type of integration is called as an inbound integration. This type of integration is called as an inbound integration. So whenever we are performing an inbound integration, we must connect Salesforce with a third-party system. We must connect Salesforce with a third-party system. Now, in this case, Salesforce would act as a receiver. Salesforce would act as a receiver. Whereas this third party system would act as a sender, source, or whatever you wanted to say. Salesforce, by the way, is acting as a receiver party, as a destination party, whereas the third party system is acting as a sender one, who's actually sending. So we must establish, whenever we wanted to perform this type of integration, an inbound integration, where you are receiving something, the Salesforce is acting as a receiver, it's receiving something. So if you if you as a Salesforce, if you are receiving something, we first of all, would require to establish a connection between Salesforce to that third party system, to transfer all these parameters, because see, the third party system would send the response back based on what parameters you have transferred to it, so to transfer all those parameters to that third party system so that it could compile and understand what kind of request the Salesforce has, generated, we must establish a connection between Salesforce and that third party system. To convey this message from Salesforce to that external system, there must be a medium, there must be a channel, there must be certain medium of communication, certain channel of communication in between two of them. So that channel, that communication is done, it's actually is established by using HTTP classes. HTTP, the full form stands for Hypertext Transfer Protocol. That is what it is, a full form of an HTTP. HTTP stands for Hypertext Transfer Protocol. So if we wanted to, if from the Salesforce, if we wanted to communicate with any web service, like I'm going to take two examples. One of them is like postal pin code API. The weather map API would be second one. See, this is a standalone application, isn't it? This is a standalone application. Everything, whatever has been written inside, the codings and everything, right? This is a standalone application running on web, running on World Wide Web. So you are accessing this with certain URL, isn't it? So I wanted, like, for example, this application is capable, like if you would send certain pin code to this application, it would give that details of the pin code, but in the form of JSON. But this is a standalone application. Now, let's consider inside in my Salesforce, I'm working on a project, on a requirement where this is my Salesforce and there is an object. Inside in the object, if someone would enter, let's say if someone would enter a pin code, I wanted to display the whole information of that pin code. Now, Salesforce is not capable inside in database.com. It doesn't have that data. So how you are going to, for example, if someone would enter, there is a text box, and if someone would enter 4400, whatever it is, and after there is a button called a submit button. Once you press that submit button, the whole information, this piece of information, we wanted to display this. But let's say in more readable form, we could construct a table for that. We could construct a table, and then we could display the information like city and block, whatever you see over here. We can display every field name as a table, and then entity as a record. But how come this information would come inside in the Salesforce? So for that, there is an application. There is an application which is available on World Wide Web. This is that application. I'm just trying to show you that. So what we are going to do, we would going to transfer this 440024 as a parameter to this postal pin code API. Postal pin code API. And after receiving this parameter, After receiving this parameter, it would going to send me that response back into the Salesforce, which we would compile. We would convert that in from, we would going to perform that deserialization process that we have studied. This response is in the form of JSON. I would convert it in the form which I am going to require, right? In my own way. Whatever the form, we are going to perform this inside. We are going to perform it from the JSON to the Apex record, the process of deserialization, what you have studied just now. And then we are going to display that information somewhere in the Salesforce, maybe in an object, a record page, a table, whatever. It is pretty simple thing. But these are two separate applications. Salesforce is one of them. This is another one. These are two separate applications. How you are going to establish that connection? So to establish that connection, that this information should flow, this to flow that information, to perform that streamline flow of that information, we have to establish a channel between them two. Now, this everything is always carried out with HTTP classes. So HTTP is a ready-made class, a set of a ready-made classes and the methods which would help you out inside in the Apex programming, particularly with the integration part. The HTTP classes are a ready-made set of classes, inherited classes. HTTP, this is a mother class, there's a parent class. Then there are 2 to 3 inherited child classes like HTTP request and HTTP response. So these are a set of collections of all those classes and the methods by which you can establish a connection. You can establish a connection between Salesforce and a third-party system, particularly when we are performing an inbound integration. When we are performing an inbound integration that time. All right. So this was a small introduction about what is the use of HTTP classes. Now, I wanted every one of you to go to Google or maybe YouTube. There, try to find out a more relevant theory related to HTTP classes that would again give you a detailed idea about what is the role of these classes. Otherwise, just to cut it short, I have explained that when we wanted to connect Salesforce with a third-party system, why we wanted to do that? Because we wanted to transfer certain request and so as to receive certain response from that third-party system. That means we are performing an inbound integration with this with third-party system. So particularly that time, so to establish those connections between Salesforce and that external system, we take the help of HTTP classes. All right, we take the help of HTTP classes. Now HTTP is first of all is the parent class, right? HTTP is first of all is a parent class. HTTP, when I say HTTP, it's a parent class. Now this parent class has two inherited child class. The first one is HTTP request, and the next one is like HTTP response. HTTP response. These are two inherited classes. The parent class is HTTP. Now this HTTP has two inherited child classes. One is HTTP request, the another one is HTTP response. All of them have their own separate methods. Like HTTP classes have their methods, HTTP response have their methods, and HTTP request has their methods. HTTP response to have its own methods, right? So we are going to learn all of them. What are the methods of HTTP? What are the methods of HTTP request? And what are the methods of HTTP response? All right, let's see this. So inside in the HTTP class, there are more than two methods, but two of them we are going to use. The most important would be send method. By this send method, we are going to send the request to that third-party system. Just now I have told you that, see, if this is a Salesforce and if this is an external system. So from the Salesforce, you are going to send the request. You are going to send the request to the third-party system. Without requesting, how you are going to expect the response? See, this third-party system would send a response back to you in the form of JSON, but only if you have requested. If you wouldn't request, how this third-party system would send you something? So to request something, To send that request, to a third-party system from Salesforce, there's a method called as send. Pretty simple, isn't it? The parameter to this send method is the HTTP request. You have to first of all form a request. You first of all would require to form a request. And this is a request which you have to send. This is a request which you have to send. So send is that method of HTTP class which is used to send a request, All right. Now, how we are going to create that request? See, the request itself have its own format. There is a fixed syntax in which you have to draw this request, right? It's a calculated equation. We cannot variate that. So there is a fixed format of formatting a request as well. So to construct that request, we have another class. That is what I was trying to say, that HTTP is the parent class. HTTP is the parent class. Now, this parent class has two child classes. First is HTTP request. The another one is HTTP response, right? So HTTP has a method called as send. HTTP has a method called as send. Now, this send method, by using this send method, we can simply send a request to external third-party system. That I want, for example, I wanted to get the details of this particular pin code. So that pin code must be formatted in a syntax, and it should be sent to the external third-party system. So that send as a parameter, it must consist of a request. What we are sending a request to external system. This request is generated by HTTP request class. This request is generated by HTTP request class. So let's come to the HTTP request part. Let's come to HTTP request part. So HTTP request is that class which again have a few of the methods like this. And by using these methods, we can formulate a request. We can generate, we can create, we can form a request. And whenever we are forming a request, let's try to understand the role of these methods. The first is set method. Set method. Set method. Now this, there are certain different types of method: get, post, put, and patch or delete. You would be going to understand this more when we would create the web service class, because for every one of them, get, post, put, patch, and delete, I would be going to take one separate example for every one of them. But let me try to just give a small idea with this so that, yeah, if you would see here, there's something has written like get. What does it mean? See, what actually happens is like there are different forms of methods. There's a method called as get. Get is used to retrieve the data, get the data. Like inside in your SQL query, you write down a statement called as select. And when you give like select ID, name, and whatever from the object, so this select statement would retrieve the data and it get it back to you, right? In the same way, there is a method called as get. Get simply used to retrieve something, to fetch out something from a source. Then there's a method called as post. Post is used to perform the insert operation. Put is used to perform update operation. Patch, which is not written over here, patch is used to perform upsert operation. Insert plus update. And delete is obviously used to delete that data. We would be going to learn this whole methods in the next topic called web services. When we inside in the Salesforce would going to create the web service classes. Then we would, for every one of them, for get method, for put method, for post method, for patch method, and for the delete method. For all 6 of them, we are going to construct 6 separate programs. So you are going to learn this in detail. So don't have to worry about this. All right. So we have to mention what is the type of method this API is using. And how we are going to know with this? It always comes with a document called as API document. Actually, what happens, let me tell you this. Whenever we perform an integration with any third-party system, It always have a document, right? It always have a document. We have to go through with that. In this case, this is that page. You can consider this as a document. You can consider this page as a document. That this page primarily would give you that information what is required for to carry out this integration. Like it has the following formats. It has the following formats of this is called as endpoint URL. I'm coming to that fact. There are two different forms of URL. I mean, HTTP यहाँ तक तो ये common ही है, ठीक है? यहाँ तक ये common है. Beyond that, you can give pin code as a parameter. If you are giving pin code, you have to include pin code. If you are giving something else like postal office branch or something as a parameter, then you have to give. So there are two different forms of endpoint URLs, but both of them follows a get method. So what I have to understand from out of this, what type of method is used inside in the source, the API. The API is created by using which form of method, and you can see that method is get method. Get method. So the first parameter, what I have to set with this method, set method, is what sort of method is used. So this completely depends. You cannot make any assumption over here. What are the different forms of method? Get, post, put, pass, delete. But you cannot make any assumption. You have to go through this document, that integration document, and then you have to understand कि भाई इसमें से मुझे कौन सी मेथड यहाँ पे यूज करना है. सो दैट इज ऑलवेज मेंशन. आपको अज्यूम नहीं करना है, ठीक है? आपको बस डॉक्यूमेंट पढ़ना है, वहां लिखा रहता है स्पेसिफिकली कि दिस एपीआई इज कंस्ट्रक्टेड बाय यूजिंग दिस टाइप ऑफ मेथड. और ये मेथड्स दे आर यूनिवर्सल मेथड्स, ठीक है? ये मेथड्स जो हैं दीज आर ऑलवेज यूनिवर्सल मेथड्स. सो वी हैव टू सी एंड देन वी हैव टू सेट मेथड. हमको फिर उसको सेट करना पड़ता है. देन द नेक्स्ट इज एंड पॉइंट यूआरएल. एंड पॉइंट यूआरएल मतलब होता है कि आप कौन से यूआरएल से इसको एक्सेस करते हो, ठीक है? दैट इज ऑल्सो इज ऑलवेज हैव बीन मेंशन. अब यूआरएल क्या होता है? यूनिफॉर्म रिसोर्स लोकेटर. देखिए, इसके बारे में थोड़ा सा एक छोटा सा डिस्कशन हम कर लेते हैं. मे बी आपको पता होगा या हो सकता है नहीं पता होगा. So you go to any website. Like example, if I wanted to go, I mean, if I wanted to see this application, Make My Trip, now this application is completely is available on World Wide Web, www dot. Whenever we access something, this is also a cloud. If we are accessing something from, if we are accessing something on this World Wide Web by using a browser, like I'm using Google Chrome for this, there is an application called Make My Trip, right? There's an application called Make My Trip. I'm accessing this application. How comes? What is the channel? What is the, I mean, what is that tool which I'm using for this? Is this tool, Google Chrome. Now, how I'm able to access this? Because there is a URL. So this address of this website, when you type this address, for example, you type www.bhaskar.com. So this is what? This is an address. Now, this address is called as URL, Universal Resource Locator. So if you are accessing any application, and don't call it as a website, because it's not always an website. It's always safe to call this as an application. All right, if you still wanted, you can say it as a website. I don't have any issue. But what I would say is like, I would say is always an application, and whatever the application that is available on the web, World Wide Web, if I wanted to access that application, I have to go with that address. It's as good as like, if somebody would post us a letter, right? If someone is posting us a letter, then that letter must have our address, our entire postal address. What is your plot number, flat number, what is your area name, your pin code, everything. And then only that letter is coming to you, right? Then that letter is going to be delivered to the proper address. So this is as simple as like this only. Every application, every website which is available on the World Wide Web, www dot, has an address. We always have Internet Explorer. What you type over here on this address bar, https, and then this / or www dot, right? www dot like youtube.com. So this complete is what? This is an address. And there is a proper name for this address. What is that? URL, Uniform Resource Locator. So this URL in general term, this is an address. In more general term or a more specific term, it's a URL. Or more technically, this is called as endpoint URL. Endpoint URL. So when we use this method set endpoint, we actually would require to enter what we require to enter. We have to enter that address of whatever the web service, whatever the application, what we are trying to access from the World Wide Web. We have to enter that URL over here. Then we would eventually would know of what are the different methods, set body, set timeouts. We will not going to use every one of out of them, but whatever is required, we're going to see. Most importantly, what you have to understand out of this context is by using various methods of HTTP request class, what we create is something called as a request. Now that request, what we have formulated, we are going to put this request inside send method, but the send method is of HTTP class. You would send this request, what you have created, by using HTTP request class. Now, see what is going to be happen is like, you would send a request. As an step number one, first of all, I would form a request. Okay, and this is a known pattern. This has to be followed every time. Every time, whenever we do an inbound integration, this has to be followed. So whenever I form, the first step is always going to be form a request. Second, send that request. What you have created in step number one, send that request by using send method of HTTP classes. Now form that request. Step number one, form that request by using HTTP request class. Actually, you have to form that request. Then the second, you have to send that request. Now third, once you send the request, you would going to get the response. You would going to get to collect that response. How you are going to collect that response? There is a separate class for that. HTTP response class. HTTP request response class. This is going to be the method and how you are going to form a request. I'm going to tell this everything in program. So that's the reason I'm skipping this for now. अभी इसको थोड़ा सा मैं आपको I'm just trying to give you a general idea. Then how to form the request, क्या syntax है वगैरह वगैरह, वो सारी चीजें हम प्रोग्राम में डिस्कस करते हैं. So once you have formed that request, आपने एक बार request बना ली, this is that pattern syntax. उसके बाद आप वो request को send कर देते हो. जब आप उस रिक्वेस्ट को सेंड करते हो थर्ड पार्टी सिस्टम को, तो वो आपको रिस्पांस देना शुरू करता है. यू हैव टू कलेक्ट दैट रिस्पांस. तो रिस्पांस कलेक्ट करने के लिए देयर इज अ सेपरेट मेथड कॉल्ड एज एचटीटीपी रिस्पांस क्लास है. उसकी मेथड्स हैं गेट बॉडी, गेट स्टेटस, गेट एज अ वैल्यू, गेट एज अ स्ट्रिंग. यहाँ नहीं लिखा है यहाँ पे, बट है. दीज आर द मेथड्स. दीज आर द मेथड्स व्हाट वी हैव टू यूज. यूजुअली गेट बॉडी यूज करते हैं हम लोग. So these are the methods by which I would collect the response back. ठीक है, I would collect the response back. बस 3 स्टेप्स हैं, ज्यादा कुछ नहीं है. इट्स प्रीटी सिंपल टू अंडरस्टैंड. चलिए, अब इसका ये जो सिंटैक्स है ना, दिस वी नीड टू फॉलो दिस एवरी टाइम. दिस इज वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट. एवरी टाइम यू नीड टू फॉलो द सेम पैटर्न. दिस if you are formulating an HTTP request, you have to follow this pattern every time for every program. Every time, this is not going to be get changed. You have to follow the same pattern every time for every program. What is that? Let's understand. As in step number one, create an object. I guess it's not written. Oh yeah, it's have been written, but still let me explain. Step number one, create the object of HTTP class, the parent class. If you want, you can write it down, no problem. Create an object of HTTP class. Step number one. आप सबसे पहले जो parent class है, उसका एक ऑब्जेक्ट बनाए. हाउ टू क्रिएट द ऑब्जेक्ट ऑफ द क्लासेस, वो तो हमें पता है ना, वो तो कोई बड़ी बात नहीं. नेम ऑफ द क्लास, नेम ऑफ द ऑब्जेक्ट equals to new keyword, name of the class, make it as a default constructor. So this is how like you make this as an object of that particular class, right? That particular class. So step number one, create the object of HTTP class. Step number one. Step number two, form the request. Create the request. How to create the request? If I wanted to create the request in the same way, I first of all would require to create an object of HTTP request. देखो भाई, कई मर्तबा ये बातें हो चुकी हैं कई बार। भाई ये सारी मेथड्स हैं, अच्छा ठीक है, कौन सी क्लास की मेथड्स हैं? HTTP रिस्पॉन्स, ठीक है भाई, ये सारी मेथड्स हैं, दीज ऑल आर द मेथड्स। अच्छा ठीक है, कौन सी क्लास की मेथड्स हैं? दीज आर द मेथड्स ऑफ HTTP रिक्वेस्ट। नाउ इफ आई वांटेड टू यूज एनी वन ऑफ देम, मेथड्स, कोई भी क्लास की मेथड्स, और या फिर उसके अंदर डिफाइन किया गया कोई वेरिएबल, एक जनरल टर्मिनोलॉजी में हम उसे कहते हैं मेंबर ऑफ अ क्लास। आप किसी भी मेथड को जो कि एक क्लास को बिलोंग करती है, या फिर कोई भी वेरिएबल, कोई भी प्रॉपर्टी जो उसके अंदर डिफाइन की गई है, आप इन जनरल टर्म्स यू कॉल दिस एज अ मेंबर ऑफ अ क्लास। नाउ इफ आई वांटेड टू एक्सेस दैट मेंबर ऑफ अ क्लास, अगर मैं उस मेंबर तक पहुंचना चाहता हूं, इफ लेट्स से आई वांटेड टू एक्सेस अ वेरिएबल, आई वांटेड टू यूज अ मेथड ऑफ अ क्लास, I cannot do that directly. I first of all would require to create an object. एक representative चाहिए मुझे उस object का. So this we have studied a lot many time, right? तो आपको मैंने कहा कि भैया आपने request बनानी है, तो रिक्वेस्ट बनाने के लिए यू आर गोइंग टू यूज द मेथड्स लाइक सेट एंड पॉइंट, या सेट मेथड, या सेट टाइम आउट। नाउ सी दीज ऑल आर सेट एंड पॉइंट्स, या फिर ये सेट बॉडी, सेट मेथड, दीज आर द मेथड्स ऑफ अ क्लास, विच क्लास? HTTP रिक्वेस्ट क्लास। इफ आई वांटेड टू यूज दीज मेथड्स, आई फर्स्ट ऑफ ऑल वुड रिक्वायर टू क्रिएट एन ऑब्जेक्ट ऑफ दिस क्लास। ये तो जनरल प्रिंसिपल है ऑब्जेक्ट ओरिएंटेड प्रोग्रामिंग का। और सिवाय एपेक्स के ये बहुत जगह, ऐसा नहीं है एपेक्स सिवाय एपेक्स ने, सॉरी, एपेक्स के अलावा भी ये बहुत जगह यूज होता है। विद ऑलमोस्ट एवरी ऑब्जेक्ट ओरिएंटेड प्रोग्रामिंग यू हैव टू फॉलो द सेम प्रिंसिपल एवरी टाइम, राइट? सो भाई हमने रिक्वेस्ट बनानी है, वी हैव टू सेंड द रिक्वेस्ट। तो रिक्वेस्ट फॉर्म करने के लिए आई फर्स्ट ऑफ ऑल वुड रिक्वायर टू क्रिएट एन ऑब्जेक्ट ऑफ HTTP रिक्वेस्ट क्लास। HTTP रिक्वेस्ट, कोई भी एक ऑब्जेक्ट पकड़ा आपने, उसके बाद में सेट एंड पॉइंट की वैल्यू दे दो, मेथड कौन सी डिफाइन कर दो, टाइम आउट कितना चाहिए आपको। टाइम आउट यूजुअली क्या होता है कि आफ्टर सेंडिंग द रिक्वेस्ट हाउ मच टाइम वी हैव टू वेट, द मैक्सिमम आई गेस इट इज 10 मिनट्स इफ आई एम नॉट रॉन्ग। I'll have to check it out, but मेरे हिसाब से हम देख लेते हैं, डोंट वरी, वी डोंट हैव टू मेक दिस assumption, वो सारी चीजें आ जाती हैं, डेवलपर कंसोल पे नजर आता है। आई गेस द मैक्सिमम टाइम आउट इज 10 मिनट, 1 लाख सेकेंड्स। तो 10,000 between 1 seconds to 1 lakh, if I can, I mean, if I'm not wrong, we can put up the value. अदरवाइज क्या रहता है मैक्सिमम, मिनिमम कितना या मैक्सिमम कितना? आप गूगल भी कर सकते हो यार, अगर मैं गलत भी हो रहा हूँ तो कोई दिक्कत नहीं है, आप गूगल करके भी देख सकते हो। व्हाट इज द मिनिमम? तो 1 ही सेकेंड होगा ऑब्वियसली, यहाँ पे मिली सेकेंड्स में दिया जाता है। व्हाट इज द मैक्सिमम लिमिट ऑफ टाइम आउट, दैट यू कैन डेफिनेटली फाइंड इट आउट, उसका वैल्यू कितना रह सकता है। Anyways, so with all this, with all this, we have form a request. हमने एक request बनाई है, ठीक है, एक request बनाई है। Now see, this is that request which we are sending, and we are send. If we wanted to use, I mean, हम उसको send करना चाहते हैं, तो send method कहाँ से आती है? HTTP से आती है। Send method कहाँ से? Send method किसकी है? Send method किसकी है? Send is a method of HTTP class। इसीलिए स्टेप बाय स्टेप बहुत सिंपल अप्रोच है ये, ठीक है। स्टेप नंबर वन में मैंने HTTP का एक ऑब्जेक्ट बनाया, और उस ऑब्जेक्ट को पकड़ के फिर हमने सेंड किया। क्या सेंड किया? रिक्वेस्ट। और जब ये रिक्वेस्ट चली गई तो ये रिस्पॉन्स जो लेके आएगी, दैट वी आर कनेक्टिंग इनसाइड HTTP रिस्पॉन्स, उसका हमने एक वेरिएबल बनाया, पोस्टल रिस्पॉन्स, जो HTTP रिस्पॉन्स क्लास का है, और उसमें हम उसको कलेक्ट करते हैं। तो दिस इज प्रीटी सिंपल टू अंडरस्टैंड। क्या करना है आपको? फर्स्ट क्रिएट, स्टेप नंबर वन, क्रिएट द ऑब्जेक्ट ऑफ HTTP क्लास। एक क्लास HTTP का एक ऑब्जेक्ट बना के रख लो। उसके बाद रिक्वेस्ट फॉर्म करो। रिक्वेस्ट फॉर्म करने के लिए आप रिक्वेस्ट, जो HTTP रिक्वेस्ट क्लास है, उसका भी एक ऑब्जेक्ट बनाओ। उस ऑब्जेक्ट को पकड़ के आप, दो तीन पैरामीटर्स हैं, सबसे सबसे इंपॉर्टेंट है एंड पॉइंट, उसके बाद मेथड, ये दो सबसे इंपॉर्टेंट है, बाकी ऑप्शनल है। अगर आप ये दोगे तो अच्छी बात है, नहीं दोगे तो डिफॉल्ट जो मैक्सिमम टाइम है, जिसकी वैल्यू अभी मुझे क्लिक नहीं हो रही है, वो ऑटोमेटिकली सेट हो जाता है। तो इवन इफ यू गिव दिस इज अ गुड थिंग, इफ यू वोंट गिव इट, तो भाई जो भी डिफॉल्ट जो टाइम आउट होता है, मैक्सिमम टाइम आउट, दैट इज ऑलवेज गोइंग टू बी गेट अज्यूम्ड इन दिस केस। चलो ठीक है, वो एक अलग बात है। इस तरह से वी वुड फॉर्म अ रिक्वेस्ट, हम एक रिक्वेस्ट फॉर्म करते हैं, देन वी वुड सेंड दैट रिक्वेस्ट, वी वुड सेंड दैट रिक्वेस्ट। तो सेंड मेथड यूज करने के लिए ही तो आपने ये सेंड मेथड, बिकॉज एचटीटीपी की क्लास की है, तो आपने पहले उसका एक ऑब्जेक्ट बना रखा है, उसको पकड़ के फिर आपने इसको सेंड कर दिया। Once you have sent that request to collect the response back, you also have created one variable, one object of HTTP response. अब उसमें आप कलेक्ट कर लिया उसके बाद में whatever you wanted to do। एक बार जब हमको रिस्पांस मिल जाता है तो हम सिस्टम डॉट डीबग में या गेट बॉडी से उसको बाइफरगेट करके वी कैन डू दैट। उसके बाद हम आगे जेसन पार्सिंग का भी यूज कर सकते हैं। अगर जेसन के फॉर्म में डेटा आ रहा है तो उसको पार्स करके कैसे भेजना, दैट एवरीथिंग वी कैन डू। ठीक है, तो ये पैटर्न हमको फॉलो करना है, दिस इज व्हाट वी हैव टू फॉलो एवरी टाइम। आज शायद मैं प्रोग्राम नहीं ले पाऊंगा, बट लेट मी ट्राई टू एक्सटेंड दिस एज फार एज पॉसिबल। तो दीज आर गोइंग टू बी द स्टेप्स, दीज आर गोइंग टू बी द स्टेप जो मैंने आपको बताया, एवरी टाइम वी वुड फॉलो। अब यहाँ पे एक बड़ी इंपॉर्टेंट सी बात है, we have to guess this one. See, even though if you have created a flawless program, right? If your program is absolutely, there's a word for that. I just forgot. Impeccable. When we say impeccable, so it means this is completely error free. There's no small error into that. So even though if your program is absolutely error free program, is an impeccable program, still, if you have not added remote site setting, you won't, Salesforce does not allow you to get the parameters, to receive the parameters. So see, I'm going to explain you this, I mean maybe by tomorrow, step by step, जब हम करेंगे ये वाला पहला प्रोग्राम बनाएंगे तब, but let's understand this. So whenever there's one more thing what you should know, वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट थिंग, वेरी आई शुड से वेरी वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट थिंग। तो जैसे मैंने कहा कि वी वुड गोइंग टू कंस्ट्रक्ट अ प्रोग्राम, एंड बाय दिस प्रोग्राम लेट्स से आई वुड गोइंग टू सेंड सर्टन पैरामीटर्स टू अ थर्ड पार्टी सिस्टम, और उसके उस वो रिक्वेस्ट मैं भेजूंगा, हाउ टू सेंड दैट रिक्वेस्ट एंड एवरीथिंग वी हैव डिस्कस्ड। तो ये मुझे रिस्पॉन्स जो है वापस भेजेगा। But see, this can only be happen. This can only be happen if you have added this endpoint URL. इसका जो endpoint URL है, मतलब वो endpoint URL जिसकी मदद से आप इसको आप यूज करने वाले हो। सो endpoint URL जो है, so if you have added that endpoint URL into remote site setting of Salesforce, this is very important. Remote site setting of Salesforce equals to endpoint URL, ये होना चाहिए। अगर ये आपने नहीं ऐड किया है ना इनसाइड इन योर सेल्स फोर्स रिमोट साइट सेटिंग में, इफ यू हैव नॉट एडेड द एंड पॉइंट यूआरएल, तो ये वेबसाइट आपको कुछ भी पैरामीटर रिसीव आप इससे नहीं कर पाओगे। इवन दो इफ यू आर sending everything in a proper way, still Salesforce does not allow you to receive that data from records, everything, any response. Salesforce wouldn't allow you to receive something from the external system unless that endpoint has been added into endpoint URL. So how we are going to add that and everything, we're going to see this by tomorrow morning when we would start taking this program. This program probably again would take 2 sessions. I'm not sure whether we can complete this in a single setting. So it would probably require 2 separate sessions because there's a lot many things which I need to explain. And from this onward, every program integrations is like a little lengthy kind of things. So it would going to require probably every program which I would take would require 2 or 3 sessions, right? So that we are going to feel from by tomorrow. So tomorrow morning, I would take this first program where we would interact with one of the external system, one of the external application called postal pin code API, and this is a separate standalone application. It's a separate application. We would going to integrate this application with Salesforce, and then this parameters, this pin codes and everything, we would going to construct a front end page by using Visual Force page. But I have tried this with Lightning. I tried this with the Lightning, but basically there's something which I'm missing out with the I was trying this, but there's definitely something which I am missing it out. I'm just trying to research it out. If by using a Lightning page, if you see, this is what I have tried everything. I was doing this. I was having time this weekend. So I was trying to construct a front end part by using a lightning page, that everything has been constructed, but unfortunately I'm not getting the response of this. So there's something which I'm missing. I'll have to check it out. Well, if you would creating a class for the integration with the lightning, what are the things which needs to be get added? So I tried to create a program by using lightning for this one, but unfortunately I didn't get it. Anyways, that's a different story. वैसे भी lightning पढ़ाना ये मेरा काम नहीं है आपको, but मैं चाहता था कि अगर ये प्रोग्राम सक्सेसफुली रन हो गया तो फिर मैं आपको दिखा देता था. But there is something which out of this context which is I'm missing it out. मैं भी ढूंढ रहा हूँ कि क्या मिस हो रहा है मेरे से. Anyways, इसका फ्रंट एंड मैं विजुअल फोर्स पेज से ही बनाऊंगा, बिकॉज दैट इज अ नोन प्रैक्टिस टू मी. और उसके बाद में फिर हम देखते हैं इसको. ठीक है, that's all for today. Tomorrow morning I'm going to start with this. Any questions, guys? Any questions? Yes, anyone wanted to ask anything?
Hello, sir.
Yes, Ruchira.
Sir, in practical way, in day-to-day office job, do you from which site you need to retrieve data
नहीं,
by
ऐसा
getting
ऐसा
it?
कुछ नहीं है, ऐसा कुछ नहीं. That completely depends on for which application you are performing an integration. Recently, I have performed an integration with this one. There's an application called Chameleon. So this Chameleon application is a sort of I'm not going to send. I will not receive this because this requires an organizational email ID. But again, if you would go and see what is a Chameleon, so Chameleon is a standalone application particularly used for case management. One second. Contact management. All right. So this is an application one of our client was using. I mean, their entire contacts they have stored this inside this application. Now, recently they have started using Salesforce. So what they wanted this Chameleon to be get integrated with the Salesforce. They don't want it to discontinue this application. There might be certain reasons for that. Maybe they are very used to of this application. Their clients, their stakeholders, their users, they are very familiar with this application. Now, if they would, in the next day, they would come and say, now from this onward, you have to start using the Salesforce. That probably, make a great inconvenience for them. So because they wanted certain time or maybe to train their people onto the Salesforce, और हो सकता है या फिर वो Salesforce इसके लिए यूज ही ना करना चाहते हो, है ना? But still they wanted in the backend Salesforce should work. So if we got this requirement, I have to integrate Chameleon with the Salesforce. ताकि if inside in the Chameleon, if certain account or contacts would get created, that should automatic. It's what one way communication. Simple था, काफी simple था मेरे लिए. It was something like कि अगर Chameleon application पे कोई भी contact create होता है, I would just require to get it inside in the Salesforce. Now contact could have a related account और नहीं भी हो सकता, because we know between account and contact there is a lookup relationship in the Salesforce. For them it was mandatory. On the Chameleon there it's something like if you would create an contact, it should have a mandatory account. और by the way Salesforce में ऐसा होता है, NPSP नॉन प्रॉफिट सर्विस पैक, ये क्लाउड है Salesforce का. जैसे सेल्स क्लाउड, सर्विस क्लाउड, मार्केटिंग क्लाउड है, तो देयर इज अ क्लाउड कॉल्ड एज एनपीएसपी. एनपीएसपी में भी ऐसा ही होता है कि इफ यू वुड क्रिएट एन अकाउंट इट वुड ऑटोमेटिकली क्रिएट एन कॉन्टैक्ट. सो फॉर एवरी कॉन्टैक्ट देयर इज अ मैंडेटरी अकाउंट इन एनपीएसपी. तो कैमिलियन में ऐसा होता था, तो वो बस मुझे एक्सट्रैक्ट करना था. तो आई हैव रिटन दोस क्लासेस. मैंने क्लासेस लिखी, ठीक है, उसको बैच किया. बिकॉज आई बैच इसलिए किया बिकॉज दिस इज अ होल डेटा, काफी बंच ऑफ अमाउंट रह सकता है दैट नीड्स टू बी गेट एक्सपोर्ट. और उसको मैंने शेड्यूल किया एवरी डे, क्योंकि आज अगर कोई क्रिएट कर रहा है वो भी आना चाहिए, और कल कोई कर रहा है तो वो भी सेल्सफोर्स के साथ होना चाहिए. तो मैंने सबसे पहले एपीआई लिखा, उसको बैच में डाला और बैच को मैंने शेड्यूल किया. दिस वाज माय स्टेप बाय स्टेप अप्रोच. अब यहाँ पे ये जैसा आपने सवाल किया कि रियल टाइम पे क्या होता है, रियल टाइम पे डिपेंड्स ऑन फ्रॉम वेयर यू वांटेड टू इंटीग्रेट. दैट डिपेंड्स ऑन द रिक्वायरमेंट. एयर टेबल के साथ मैंने इंटीग्रेट किया था सेल्स फोर्स को. एयर टेबल वॉज एन स्टैंड अलोन एप्लीकेशन, एयर टेबल एपीआई, इसके साथ मैंने इंटीग्रेशन किया था. सो दैट वाज अगेन इट वाज अ काइंड ऑफ लाइट वेटेड सीआरएम ही था एक तरह से ये. सी, तो इसके साथ भी मैंने इंटीग्रेशन कर रखा है, मैंने गूगल के साथ इंटीग्रेशन कर रखा है. तो ये आपको मैं ऐसा नहीं कह पाऊंगा कि दीज आर सम रियल टाइम. दैट कंप्लीटली डिपेंड्स कि आपके क्लाइंट क्या यूज करता है और उसको किससे इंटीग्रेट करना है. आईडीएफसी का देखा होगा आपने. आईडीएफसी, आईडीएफसी बैंक जो है, ये पहले जावा में था पूरा. तो इसको सेल्सफोर्स में ला तो लिया गया, बट स्टिल देर आर, सेल्सफोर्स कम्युनिटी पर है पूरा प्रोजेक्ट. Still there are few of the page which is still on the java पर है, तो that migration process is still going on. अभी ये तो community है, this whatever you seeing is Salesforce community, ये front end React है, React को interface कर रखा है. So integration is very vast, it all depends कि आपको आपका रिक्वायरमेंट क्या है. ठीक है, तो वी कैन यूज सर्टन, हम लोग यहाँ पे ओपन सोर्स एपीआई जो होते हैं, 2 मिनट्स आई लेफ्ट, ओपन सोर्स एपीआई के साथ ही मैं आपको एग्जांपल बता सकता हूँ. जो क्लोज्ड एपीआईज होते हैं उसमें आई कैन नॉट टीच यू दैट इंटीग्रेशन. तो वाइल टेकिंग दिस एग्जांपल्स ड्यूरिंग ट्रेनिंग आई कैन ओनली टेक द इंटीग्रेशन फ्रॉम ओपन सोर्स एपीआईज, जिसको कोई भी कनेक्ट कर सकता है. आई होप दैट रिजॉल्व्स योर आंसर.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
वेलकम. Anything else around this or around anything, guys? Any questions? Thank you so much for joining. Have a nice day.